Our reading today is from the book of 1 Samuel. All the elders of Israel gathered together, and they came to Samuel at Ramah. And they said to him, "You are old, and your sons do not follow in your ways. Appoint for us then a king to govern us like other nations." But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, "Give us a king to govern us." And Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, "Listen to the voice of the people in all that they say to you. I have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. Just as they have done for me this day, I have brought them out of Egypt to this day, and they are forsaking me, and they are serving other gods. And also they are doing that to you. Now listen to their voice. Only you shall solemnly warn them and show them all the ways of the king who shall reign over them." So Samuel reported all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking for a king. "And these are the ways of the king who shall be reigning over you. He will take your sons, and he will point them to his chariots and to his horsemen, and to run before his chariots. And he shall appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and some to plow his ground, and some to reap his harvest, and some to make implements of war and equipment for his chariots. And he will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. And he will take the best of your fields and your vineyards and your olive orchards and give them to his courtiers. And he will take 1/10 of your grain of your vineyards and give it to his officers and to his courtiers. And he will take your male and your female slaves and the best of your cattle and your donkeys, and he will put them to his work. And he will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves. But the Lord will not answer you in that day." But the people refused to listen to the voice of Samuel, and they said, "No, we are determined to have a king over us, so that we may be like other nations, and our king may govern us and go out and fight our battles." And Samuel said to the people, "All right, let us go to Gilgal and renew the kingship." So all the people went to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before the Lord in Gilgal. And they sacrificed offerings of well-being to the Lord, and Saul and all the Israelites rejoiced greatly. The word of the Lord. A little backstory. In the Old Testament, it was common for men to have more than one wife, and Hannah was one of 2 women who were married to a man named Elkanah. And it isn't clear in the scripture which wife he married first, but Hannah had no children, while his other wife, Peninnah, had many. Now Peninnah taunted Hannah about her infertility, and this is why no one names their daughters Peninnah. Having children was an important part of the culture, and if a woman had no sons and she was widowed, she had no legal identity. She could not buy, sell, enter into contracts or into lawsuits, and Hannah's infertility didn't matter to Elkanah. The Bible makes it clear how much he loved her. Her husband Elkanah would say to her, "Hannah, honey, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons?" And in her deep anguish, Hannah prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly. Yet even in her sincere petition, Hannah met with more negativity. She met the priest Eli at the temple in Shiloh, and Eli accuses her of being drunk because she is praying so fervently for a son, and he says to her, "Are you going to stay drunk? I mean, put away your wine, woman." "Not so, my lord," says Hannah. "I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking beer or wine. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I have been praying out of my great anguish and my grief." And Eli answered, "Go, go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him." Well, Hannah did indeed become pregnant, and she named her son Samuel. And after he was weaned, she made the appointed sacrifices, and she took the boy to Eli, and he was trained up as a priest. And this was unusual, because at the time the priesthood was a family business. As a parish who was raised up a priest, Father Joseph Barnes, you may have wondered why Father Joseph could not serve here. Well, he cannot, because you would always see him as a kid. Hannah eventually gave birth to 3 more sons and 2 daughters. Now Eli the priest had 2 wicked sons named Hophni and Phinehas, and they served in the tabernacle, but they did not know the Lord. And even then, religious education was not a straight line. The sons of Eli violated the food laws, and they exploited women. Me Too is not new. Eli rebuked his sons, but failed to make them stop, and God punished the family. God promised that Eli's family line would be supplanted by another, and Eli's physical eyes became so weak that he could barely see, and worse, he ceased to have religious visions. And who was his helper? Why, the boy named Samuel. When the boy was older, the Lord himself spoke to Samuel. And in the middle of the night, the Lord came and stood in Samuel's room. And he told the young boy to deliver to Eli the message that it was almost time for the new priestly family to be in charge of the temple at Shiloh, and for Eli to give up his reign. And Eli humbly accepted God's decree, and Samuel was confirmed as a prophet of the Lord, and Saul became king. Now this is important. Eli had visual visions of God, and Samuel had auditory visions of God, and both served in the same place, but there was a generational shift between Eli's generation and his son's generation and Samuel's generation. And I thought this might give us a chance to talk about the generations at St. Luke's. Never in history have 5 generations been alive at the same time. Teaching you about 5 generations is going to take me about 4 extra minutes than normal, and so I'm hopeful that you're game. Now, traditionalists are sometimes called the silent or the forgotten generation. They value the veterans of World War II, Korea, and moral authority. They were raised by parents who survived the Great Depression, and radio was their most important technology. They saw the rise of the New Deal and benefited from programs for home ownership and education. For traditionalists, education is the dream that their parents could not have attained. They were poor as kids, but they grew in wealth, and they saw the dawn of the space age. And this generation gives time and money to the church out of duty, and Bob Dole and Elizabeth Taylor are members of this generation. Now, baby boomers are sometimes called the me generation, and they lived through the Cold War and the space race. They value civil rights and privacy and hard work towards the American dream, home ownership. And they might have been radicals in the 70s or yuppies in the 80s, but they had the highest divorce rate in history and the second highest rate of second marriages. And education became a right. And this generation gives time and money to the church if they approve of how it's being used. And they like to be asked multiple times, perhaps due to the rise of commercials on television. Half of this generation rejected the church, and of those who remained, half of them were able to raise church-going children, and they are very good kids indeed. Bill Clinton and Meryl Streep are members of the second largest generation. Gen X is sometimes called the doer generation. They value savings as they are the first generation who will not do as well as their parents. Half had divorced families, and more working moms meant that many were latchkey kids. And this means that their number one priority is programming for children and youth. They cautiously delayed marriage and childbearing, fearing layoffs from the end of corporate stability. They feel safer than their parents during the Cold War, which ended, and crime fell by half since the 1990s, but they did their dating during the beginning of the AIDS epidemic. Gen X donors are more likely to give to nonprofits that focus not on church, but on research and public policy and international affairs and community development. Many donors in this age group see giving to charity as part of their personal identity, as part of their brand, and they do a lot of research. And they were the first generation to have computers as children, and about 25% of them are churchgoers. Barack Obama and Jennifer Lopez are members of this generation. Millennials are sometimes called Generation Next. They value teamwork, authenticity, and work-life flexibility. They are the first generation to have schedules. They were digital natives, and they never knew a time before computers. They grew up in a child-focused world, but felt the threats of terrorist attacks and school shootings. They grew up in a time of prosperity followed by a time of austerity. And this means that while boomers' average age of first marriage was 23, the average age of first marriages for a millennial is 30. This largest of generations is very generous. They are more likely to make charitable donations than other generations. 70% of millennials donate to a charity. And this is fascinating because they are less likely to own a home or a car. This generosity makes them similar to traditionalists, and they prefer to donate digitally. More than 80% see Christians as judgmental, hypocritical, as opposed to same-sex unions, and insensitive. 40% think the church does pretty good works, and about half think that religious education is valuable. Many who believe are first-generation Christians. Mark Zuckerberg and Emma Watson are members of this generation. Gen Z are sometimes called the screenagers. They value an integration between faith and work. Meaningful work is more highly valued than family, but that might shift with age. They can easily connect with folks far away, but may have a harder time connecting in person. COVID sequestering may make this worse or may make it better. We don't know yet. And Gen Z is hyper aware of how they are portrayed on social media and have been exposed to more modified images than other generations. Gen Z tends to be inclusive of all people, practices, and perspectives. They are open-minded and sensitive to other people's feelings and opinions. They are more comfortable than other generations talking about human sexuality and gender on a spectrum. And we do not know yet how they give, but we know that they tend to prefer collective political solutions to problems. Luca Sabat and Lele Pons are members of this generation. And if their names do not sound familiar to you, that's because they are YouTube stars and not dependent on mainstream media. Just like Hannah, who was longing for children, and Eli, who was wondering what went wrong with the religious education of his children. We have some of those feelings too. And if I got that right, you know what to do. Researchers tell us emphatically that having kids attend half a worship service is unlikely to result in adult Christians. It works about 20% of the time. And this is delicate, but previous generations have such strong feelings about Sunday school and maybe don't really want it to be revised. I have been chatting with many of our young people and our teens to learn what they want in Christian education, and we are getting a plan together. And you might want to read 2 books with the young people because we're never done learning, right? The Path is from Forward Movement, the same people who produce the day-by-day devotional that you love. The Path is a condensed Bible written at newspaper reading level. It is also available as an audiobook or on Kindle, and if we purchase together, it will be less per copy. The second book is What is the Bible by Rob Bell. And this is a book which is available on audio or Kindle, and it links the story arcs between different parts of the Bible and is more theological than The Path. It is also more sarcastic, but it's not mean like Paniah. Later, we'll have videos to study social movements in church history, and that video list is coming together, but it's not quite complete. We're also planning playful outings as immunizations become available for younger members. Doing things differently in the church is not new. Each generation has to say, "Here I am, Lord," in their own way.